Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to this TDL webinar on 40 years of privacy technologies, what lessons we've learned, what lessons we haven't learned. Before we start and before I introduce our host moderator, a couple of housekeeping points. Use the chat for comments and interaction anytime during the webinar. Please submit any questions you have via the Q&A feature, which enables the panelists to respond and also to have your questions aired by the moderator to be addressed in the session. This session will be recorded and the link and materials associated will be shared afterwards. There'll be a summary report and a link of the recording, which will be available on the TDL YouTube site, and that will be made available to everybody who registered. And with that, I'd like to hand over to our very own TDL strategic advisor, Claire Vishik, who will guide us through the rest of this webinar. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning. Thank you for joining this webinar. We have distinguished panelists joining the discussion today. I'll introduce them very briefly. You can see their bios at TDL website. We have today Cammarota, who is a senior principal engineer and chief scientist of privacy enhancing computing research at Intel Labs. We have Angelos Kiaias, who is chair in cybersecurity and privacy at the University of Edinburgh. Also joining us is Mykolai Rogovsky, who is the director of global privacy at Arcadis. He also teaches law at Munich Intellectual Property Law Center. And finally, we are joined by Bruce Tuckman, who is founder and CEO of Texas Technology Ventures. Today, we are going to talk about privacy technologies and such connections as are necessary for us to highlight with regard to regulatory and legal frameworks associated with privacy. Privacy is a topic that has been front and center of many discussions today. But its emergence is connected with the emergence of electronic communications. At the very beginning of ARPANET, concern about privacy, ability to hide from public exposure as one of the definitions of privacy had been indicated by the early researchers as early as 1960s, and later, probably 2.5 decades later, people started talking about re-identification and how to protect against re-identification. As a result, various privacy technologies emerged, many of them theoretical, many of them applied in practice, but not adopted, and some of them adopted globally, creating our privacy technology framework today. Among the ones that attempted the adoption, what comes to mind is the trusted computing group approach and direct anonymous attestation protocol. It has been implemented in all TPMs, but to my knowledge, has only been commonly used in various prototypes. Among the technologies that appear to be purely theoretical 25 years ago, such as search on encrypted data, we now have homomorphic encryption that is beginning to be broadly commercially implemented. So predicting the direction of privacy technologies is somewhat difficult. It's interesting to see the views of this distinguished panel about the evolution of privacy. Which approaches were important in the area that you currently represent? Which approaches didn't live up to their promise? Which ones have become more broadly adopted than you thought? Let's begin the discussion from this introduction. And we'll go for this first one in alphabetical order. Ro, would you like to start, please?
Yes, Claire. So in my role, I look at trade-offs associated with privacy technologies, and more specifically, we do develop a lot in labs lately on homomorphic encryption, which you mentioned. In general, what we have seen is that in the years there are two buckets of privacy technologies. One that is more general, the ones that are typically driven by cryptographic mechanisms, and it of course carry a lot of overhead and burden, whereas there are others that are more specifically applicable to artificial intelligence, which is the key driver for much innovation in society. Various reports that came about that look at trade-off technical readiness of privacy technologies in the years point to the fact that industry typically look at the easiest path to adoption for the largest return in terms of what can be claimed in privacy, which is something that it's a natural approach to this. But as AI is making us more and more think about privacy, and sometimes I think we should think about what can go right with AI rather than what can go wrong. The importance of cryptographic technologies actually is increasing. So in the past, there has been a lot of skepticism on the crypto technologies because of the scale of deployment and integration in the data pipeline that we build today that are rather complex, right? But there's been a lot of investment, like the one in the labs on homomorphic encryption that I happen to lead, where we are bringing the technology to a level of practicality that we believe we'll see adoptions. What is going to look like in the future? Well, none of the privacy technologies that we know actually solve all the problems, and the technical solution to privacy is probably going to be the right architecture for a specific class of problems, whether it's in healthcare, in finance, or other verticals.
Thank you very much, Ro. I still remember when I first came to Intel, the discussion of privacy always ended with, "Oh, just encrypt it." Without understanding or considering the implications. That was years ago, and the environment has changed, not the least thanks to your work in this area. So thank you very much for your introduction. Angelos, what is your view on the evolution of privacy technologies? You have been involved a couple of decades creating really, really innovative approaches. What do you think?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, it's a great part of our field, like to be involved in. And I'm also glad that we came a long way from what you said. Let's encrypt it. I mean, because ultimately, if you want to do anything with something, you have to decrypt it, and that's where exactly the problems start to come, right? Because if let's encrypt it is a solution, then you might as well, like, I don't know, let's delete it. But unfortunately, what is encrypted will have to be decrypted if we're going to do anything with it. and that's where the problems start. So as Ro very nicely commented on, so we have these techniques. I would say maybe there are like these techniques that say, let's manipulate the computation so that it leaks less information. So that's like the cryptographic approach, the secure multi-party computation, like homomorphic encryption, and so forth, using zero knowledge proofs as well to ensure the integrity of the computation while not leaking information. So there's like all this class of techniques, which you know, it's interesting that, you know, we know them certainly from theoretical perspective. We know them since the 80s, and in the last decade, there's been a lot of progress in actually bringing them to the real world. So now there are libraries that support, you know, cryptographic techniques for secure multi-part computation, homomorphic encryption, as Ro commented already. So the uptake is still small, but it's increasing, I would say, at least from my viewpoint. Is like I think we would all want to see more of it. I think there's a few very nice success stories. For example, like checking for compromised passwords. That was one application I think that was worth highlighting, that uses not exactly general secure multi-part computation, but certainly, you know, techniques related to that. And we could discuss these things more. And certainly there is more. I'm just picking one example. I think what was even more interesting in terms of current actual adoption and penetration is what started on the other end by saying, instead of manipulating the computation per se, let's try to manipulate the data so that they leak a smaller amount of information. And I mean, initially there was these ideas like k-anonymity and similar ones that proved to be not very effective. But then with differential privacy, things became a little bit more, you know, concrete in terms of what kind of privacy we can extract. And now there's a lot of interesting things happening. So, for example, going back to machine learning, as already Ro pointed out, there's libraries that we can use differentially private enhanced stochastic gradient descent, and certainly and a number of other techniques that we can do, you know, training of machine learning models with differential privacy. So I think there already we see benefits. I mean, these techniques are being used certainly by big tech companies, for example, to do data collection. I mean, this is, and I would say like this is really positive, right? It really matters for the perspective of privacy. So I think these are really positive developments. I think privacy is always a challenge because ultimately, from systems performance point of view, privacy is always going to make things worse, right? So, I mean, and I think that's something we have to deal with. We have to recognize if ultimately you want to compete on functionality and performance, I mean, by reducing privacy, you can be better than your competitors, right? On the other hand, if you want to add privacy, you have maybe to take a performance hit or a functionality hit, right? I mean, maybe your accuracy is worse if you're collecting statistics. So now I think the interesting and challenging question here, especially from industry perspective, which I would really be interested to hear also from our my fellow panelists here, is that the challenge here is that you have to go back and say and explain to the rest of the company that, you know, that's important. We have to do it. Maybe there's regulation that demands it, or there is a small demand from the users. I think certainly today the users are more privacy aware than they used to be. But again, the issue remains. If you have, if you tell them, oh, but then it has to be slower or it doesn't work as well, like, you know, then again, like you might still have trouble convincing them over a competing product, because the thing with privacy is that nobody cares about it until the moment something bad happens, and then of course everybody says, of course I always wanted the maximum amount of privacy. But the question is like, are you willing and prepared to take the hit for it, be it functionality or performance? Anyway, so that would be my short introduction to the topic, and looking forward to the conversation. Back to you, Claire.
Thank you, Angelos. That is true. Privacy technologies are definitely the land of trade-offs, and there, what is usually the bottom side of the trade-off becomes visible only if it affects someone directly, when there is a serious breach. We have all experienced this, probably personally, and as employees of various companies. Excellent comments from Ro and Angelos. Nikolai, what do you think? What do you think about the path that the privacy technologies have taken in conjunction with your view as a lawyer?
Yeah, I will probably offer a much more compliance-based view on this. So I think it's tremendous to see how much these technologies have developed throughout the years. But from a compliance perspective, I have to say I'm a little bit disappointed with where we are currently with the use of technology. But I think, an ideal world would be where we have a lot of these possibly much more developed versions of these technologies that in a space that allow us to achieve anonymity of the data. Whilst it seems that most of the times they still exist in the space of, TOMs, so technical and organizational measures. But I don't necessarily think that it's the issue with the technologies. I also don't necessarily think that it's the issue with the laws, because laws and technologies don't really exist in a vacuum. And I think it's more about how the general value chain around technical solutions work. And this is, of course, based on the risk factor in the EU, right? And we do have a couple of different stakeholders, the regulators, the individuals, and so on and so forth. And I think what I'm kind of still missing and hoping for is the flip of risk, which I don't think is lack of risk. I think we can all agree that in the space of privacy, and I think any technology, there is no such thing as zero risk. But I think there is such things as trust and fostering that trust. And I think one of the things that definitely the regulators and perhaps working together with the industry could do more is foster that trust. Like Angelos said, like we want to get to a position where people, whether individuals demanding better solutions or organizations, care more and earlier about that privacy, potential privacy in the potential issue in the privacy a little bit earlier. And that could take form of various things. I mean, we can look into the patent world and recognize that there are standards there as well. Claire, you've mentioned another standards as well that exist in some aspects, at least theoretically. And I think there is some hope if we look at what is being done right now around the AI Act in the EU. We have those panels of experts, which have not existed in the privacy realm when GDPR entered into force. So maybe I think that gives us a little hope, or at least me, that maybe we'll end up with the regulators that do recognize that there are very complicated interests that have to be taken into the account as you interpret the law, so that to take into the account that fostering trust through embracing, with some risk perhaps, some technologies might be an overall better move for the whole ecosystem, if you will.
Thank you. That's a very useful view to consider our risk posture when we create those technologies, as well as potential regulatory impact that they would have. Of course, there has always been a distinction between the approach in Europe and the approach to privacy in the US. So Bruce, you probably are going to tell us about the telecom and maybe in general how the US differs from Europe in this space. Please.
I'd be happy to. I mean, certainly there's a wide gap between the United States and Europe, in terms of its view towards privacy. And part of that is based upon the fact that the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights establishes data protection as, a fundamental right. And so, the existence of the GDPR, is something that is, the standard in the world, I think, in terms of, privacy regulation. The United States does not have that kind of framework.
And so I think when the founding fathers created the Constitution, they never thought about the fact that your refrigerator could be listening to you and then used to go through and send you telemarketing messages. And so at the end of the day, it wasn't until really in terms of telecommunications carriers, the Telecommunications Act of 1995 set out this concept of CPNI, which is, basically, customer data that had to be protected. But it was still based upon, the history of the telecommunications in the US, which was it excluded the fact that from customer information, the fact, your name, your address, and your telephone number. Because, the telecommunications companies were going through and publishing that in a book and then dropping it on everybody's, doorstep. And so that was never part of the privacy. The privacy was really limited to, information, which was who did you call? Who did you get calls from? How many, how long were the calls? And, and how many of them are there, And so another interesting thing about that act is the fact that it didn't include anything with respect to like credit card numbers, any your social security number, any other personal information. It was just all about, the information with respect to the telephone calls. And so, but it did start to, to go through and say, like, if this information, the CPNI was going to be shared, you needed, actually permission from the user to go through and share that information, even to your own customer service people. And so, when I was back at the phone company, for years, if someone called in and wanted to go through and talk about their account, the customer service person, at the company had to go through and ask permission to go through and access that information in order to go through and give them service, which was kind of an interesting sort of thing. Another interesting point was it took them till 2007 to realize if we're going to do that, maybe we should have a process of verifying that the person giving the permission is actually the person that is the user. And so that was a long time coming. And so, it shows you the slow and interesting pace of it in the US. And even then, there is no, the federal government has rules in terms of how, federal, the federal government can share, information that's private. The telecommunications companies have the Telecommunications Act. On the other side of the coin, the state of California has tried to go through and come up with, something that is close to the GDPR, and it keeps moving it closer and closer. In one state, with the feeling like if you're operating in the United States, chances are you're going to have some sort of thing going on in California, and so have to go through and comply with the privacy laws there. But even then, there are 11 states that have privacy laws, and they're all different. And and then there's the federal laws that apply in certain circumstances, and so. There's, back to Claire's point, there's a big difference between, the United States and Europe in terms of, not, being in a situation where there's a hodgepodge of laws that don't necessarily agree with one another, as opposed to the European Union that has, I would say, from a regulatory standpoint, probably, the best, standard in terms of, how, privacy should be dictated.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Indeed, it's much easier to understand what's happening in Europe than to internalize what's happening in the US with different approaches to different areas of privacy technologies in different states. One thing that baffled me somewhat, although it could be easily explained, there is an annual Ipsos survey that gauges security and trust in the internet every year. It has registered for many years a concern for privacy of the data and transactions. And what was interesting to me is that this concern was considerably lower in developing countries than it was in the developed countries. The difference that went probably beyond the user awareness. How do you explain this? why are the users in the developing world much less concerned about privacy, even though they have much more reason to be concerned? Anyone who would like to comment on this?
Let me try to take a stab at it. And I think part of the reasons for that, I would assume, is just the history and how I can speak for Europe, right? How important that protection of privacy has become throughout the Second World War, the post-war times where we've had the Iron Curtain. Now, these days, with the aggression of Russia on the Ukraine and general sort of attempt to meddle from the outside perspective, I think privacy has always historically played a very important role in what we would consider as safeguards of our societies and democracies and so on and so forth. And I think not having gone through that multi-generation experience, it probably just exists as one of the many interests that one has in their daily life in, let's say, less developed country. And I think that therefore makes it probably more likely that the individuals are willing to compromise on this. Seeing that, let's go into specifics, perhaps using ChatGPT every day does create a lot more efficiencies for an individual because it allows for smoother English writing, for example. So I think that trade-off kind of becomes much more acceptable than for a lot of people in Europe.
Thank you. Excellent point. Anyone else would like to comment on this?
So I would like to follow up on Mikolai's point. When it comes to technology and specifically to technological advancement, really, technology advances. I think we have different type of people. There are the people that says, okay, what can go wrong if we can do this, and people that what can go right. And where there are opportunities for more development because there was less before. I think the attitude is always to be what can go right, and therefore what is the benefit that technology directly brings to me, and then other considerations basically come secondary with respect to the benefit that you have by using the technology. Another thing that Mikolai said earlier made me kind of push the button about opting in, and Bruce also talked about it, opting in into a technology that preserves your privacy. Is the person that is opting in like the right person? That connecting the two things together, right? About the trust in the technologies with your own information and the ability to make a choice, right, to opt into and share the data, comes back ultimately to also how people or citizens in general are nudged or by regulations to be inclined to use a certain type of technology. What do I mean with this? And I want to give an example that I was reading about very recently. So during pandemic, all right, there have been like the rise of applications for contact tracing. Okay, and if you look at statistics, right, Korea was the country where without a lockdown, there was the highest containment of pandemic diffusion. The way that was possible is because citizens, right, agreed basically to share their data. Right, the government invited them, and citizens agreed to share the data in the face of a life-threatening threat. Right, there are also circumstances that makes you be willing to share your information, because actually by doing that, yes, you are saying a lot about yourself, but if you don't, the threat to yourself is much higher, right? And I think revisiting the concept of privacy as trust, where it's not all about people, but the entities that interact together are people and systems of systems, right? How to build this degree of trust to share information automatically between systems is actually a problem that we need to solve, right? And at the entry point of the system where people interact to technology, giving choices or giving choices that may be nudged by regulation, right? To say, okay, this is implicitly what I expect these systems to do for me, and I'm okay with it, right? It's not only a technological problem or a framework that falls in compliance, something that really needs to be developed.
Excellent point. There is almost everywhere in the adoption of privacy technologies, there's very strong cultural component that as technologists or even compliance people, we frequently forget about, but it's of paramount importance. Let's drill down on this a little. I have been involved in a number of projects that attempted to translate the principles of privacy by design to specific technologies. All of these projects were not successful for obvious reasons. Do you think there could be an easier translation or a possible decent translation from the requirements in regulations to the specifics of the technology development and technology frameworks? Angelos, what do you think? Do you think there could be another, principles to specific technologies opportunity that will be more successful than the first?
Yeah, so, well, I mean, in a way, I mean, this would be something very nice to have to work on, right? Especially we have regulations that can be translated into properties. I mean, in the sense that, going back to the principles you said, okay, we want to do privacy by design. Obviously, you could take a number of different approaches of how you define privacy, and of course, like, one issue with regulation is that it's usually phrased in a way that allows a lot of interpretations when you translate it, when you start with a regulation, and then you want to map it to a very concrete property of a system at the technical level. There is a number of ways that the legal requirement can be interpreted. And here, like, so, I mean, frequently what I've also experienced here is that there is like all kinds of barriers. Is the same thing that you also get when you do cross-disciplinary research. Like, you have people that come with different backgrounds. They try to express perhaps similar concepts, but their angle is different. Like, for example, you can have a cryptographer and a lawyer. They will have different understandings of what the objectives might be and how they can be translated into an actual system. So on the other hand, I think, like, working out these issues, I think that's exactly something that it's really worth putting more effort on, because that would make it much more feasible to come up with systems that are ultimately conform, let's say, with what people expect from a compliant system to operate. I mean, just to give an example here, privacy at the network layer. In many cases, it is ignored. A lot of focus is being given at the application layer. We'll look at encryption. We'll look at the ways the data are represented. We'll look at ways the data are sanitized. However, and that has been observed in a number of different use cases. If you look at the network layer and you have someone that has network layer access, this gives a tremendous amount of useful information that can be mined, and a lot of information can be extracted, even irrespective of the encoding that is used, just by observing, let's say, the timings and the flows of information between different systems and so forth. So how do you actually reflect that from a regulatory perspective, right? So, I mean, these are like fine-grained technical, distinctions there, and of course, like, someone could say, "Oh, I want the best possible." but here comes the conundrum. If you actually want to say, I want the best possible, if you actually try to get a full level, even private system at the network layer, you get like to this level, which sometimes in the literature is called unobservability, like basically like, you know, there's not absolutely nothing is leaked by the system. But actually to achieve that, you have to literally flood the network with so much information, so that the actual usable bandwidth of the system becomes, you know, tiny with respect to its basically energy consumption and bandwidth consumption and so forth. So I'm just saying, like, it's easy to make it's easy to make, like, to simplify things, let's say from a regular perspective, say, oh, I want the best possible, but then it becomes something that nobody would want to implement. So I think like the real challenge for me here is to somehow, how do we reconcile that? Sometimes when we write privacy related regulations, we can interpret them either in a very weak way, which is useless, or in a very strong way, which then nobody wants to implement. So, and I think it's sort of really hard, I think, to find, you know, exactly that sweet spot that would somehow both accommodate, you know, the need from a commercial perspective to have functioning systems that do what people want to do, and at the same time do not expose private information. So I think it's definitely much more work is needed from people sitting together from different perspectives and trying to understand these technical issues.
Yeah.
So back to you, Claire. I mean,
so if I may add to this, because I can't just not fully agree with what Agelis just said, I think that's the great opportunity that we have, especially in those risk-based regulations, where I think regulators could really step in and provide maybe not what Agelis said, like, you know, minimal or maximal recommendations, but specific recommendations. I think what we very often forget that this risk-based regimes, they were meant to help address specifically issues, not just allow regulators to indicate where the risk is and then push out managing the risk to individuals and to the industry. And that's also what I meant as like seeing some promising changes in the AI Act space, where you do have that recognition that the regulators probably aren't the best suited groups for this as part of their limited access to resources, to expertise, but specifically just, you know, opening up possibilities to create expert groups to work together and foster that trust and create those specific recommendations that would allow, you know, not just big corps, but also SMEs, smaller companies, to know that they can trust these recommendations and invest in these technologies. I think that would bring a lot of wealth of new solutions, but also definitely raise the standard of privacy protection across many different.
I think it's impossible to disagree that privacy is intrinsically a multidisciplinary subject. It's probably not productive to ensure that the regulators specifically indicate what technology directions should be pursued, simply because even among the technologies, there isn't enough knowledge as to what is going to be deployable, what is going to work as expected in the future. So I completely agree that collaboration is necessary. I also agree with what Angelo said about the need to create the regulations that are more unambiguously translatable, potentially. But this is a very difficult endeavor that is not going to be resolved just through the collaboration with technical experts. Bruce, you are at the intersection of law and technology. You have been there for quite a few years. How do you think this translation could be achieved, if it could be achieved?
Well, the fundamental problem is that when you put together a set of regulations, and I think, you know, the panelists have hit the nail on the head to a certain degree, is that once the regulation is put in place, then the solutions that pop out because of that meant to go through and figure out how to get around them or implement them in ways that suit the particular business. I mean, one thing that I think Angelos, referred to, which I think is important, is it's not just, the implementation of it, from a practical standpoint and how much it's going to cost, but also what it's going to do for the user. Because if you ask the user is going to say, of course, I want privacy. I want privacy. But on the other side of the coin, the user is going to want to go through and talk to their device and say, I want coffee, and want it to appear on their doorstep in 4 hours. And so, I mean, those are fun, the amount of data that has to be shared with so many different people along the route and everything like that, is a problem. And so, at the end of the day, users want privacy, but they also want, the freedom to do what they want, and they don't want privacy to be a barrier. I mean, if suddenly I've got to go through and show my my credit card and my my driver's license in order to go through and order my coffee, as opposed to just saying whatever device, go through and have it appear. I mean, that's an issue for the user and for the commercial viability of the product itself. And so privacy has to be there to go through and protect the user, but privacy can't be the barrier to go through and make, solutions commercially, no longer viable. And so, I mean, the regulatory environment has to be there to go through and promote smart regulations in terms of privacy and not, impede the commercial and technological developments. I mean, I think Ro went through and had an excellent point about AI. Everyone, AI is good and everything, but we don't want to go through and it's the direction that things are heading. You don't want to go through and stop AI based upon a privacy concern unless it's real. If I may, was that a correct, a way to characterize what you were saying?
Yes, it was actually, and historically, right, we have seen this thing with the. I mean, I have not seen. I read from books, but I doubt many of us have seen this, right? So the first industrial revolution, there were concerns about this, and that, but we live a better life today than the printing press, and then the cars. And then AI is the technology that is doing that for our current society and probably for a few generations ahead. You don't want that to be blocked. What can go right? That's the right attitude about it. But Angelos, if I may borrow 1 or 2 minutes, Claire, you let me know. So Angelos made the point that tickled me in a sense, which was like, okay, today networks doesn't implement privacy at a certain level, because if you would do that, it would be very cumbersome. I mean, I believe that today, in addition to say that, what would be the alternative internet for privacy at this point? We don't even know what it is, but should we as technologists in connection with regulators, as privacy, as Claire was hinting, privacy is a multidisciplinary thing. Should we rethink the infrastructure? And of course, maybe the information infrastructure that needs to be different. But of course, this is not a change that happens basically tomorrow. If today we have a solution to this problem, it's something that needs to take a number of years, a number of failures, a number of opinions that say, okay, this is non-viables and things. It's the evolution of technologies that we are living today in privacy technology. And of course, it's just accelerated by this wave of data sharing and collaboration and drawing insights with artificial intelligence. But I don't know if Angelos, you have an opinion. Should we rethink the infrastructure of information, creation, distribution, and processing?
Yeah, I mean,
I think
maybe
it's an
just
excellent point. Yeah.
Sure,
Go
Claire.
ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I was eager
After
to
you.
take that question. Yeah. because it's dear to my heart. So I would say yes. I mean, actually going back to some of these European projects, like a number of years ago, I was the coordinator of the Panoramics Consortium, where we're looking at mixed nets, which is a privacy enhancing technology at the network layer. I was happy that it was one of these European projects that when we finished, we actually had a spin out that came out of the project. Now this is called NIM Technologies and tries to basically bring mixed nets to become closer to the real world. So here's a small nod to this. And I know sometimes these European projects frequently they finish and they're sometimes they're forgotten, but this is one of the cases that I think it worked well and gives an example of how is it possible to use public funding and then try to go on and get private funding for something which is as difficult as to get funding as I would say for privacy, especially in terms of private funding. So my answer to this question is yes. Like we would like to rethink of infrastructure, and there are ways to do that. But I think again it's very hard because like the NIM mixednet right now, it's out there and it's working, but it has a big performance penalty. And the question is like, well, are the users, are there users? I mean, what are the use cases, let's say, for it? And I think, and certainly, I think we're gonna be in a situation that for some applications we want to have better privacy. So for example, like posting a financial transaction, that's something that you may want better privacy, even privacy at the network layer. While when you stream a movie, let's say, you might do with different level of privacy, right? So you might say, okay, I don't need network level. So for example, I'm comfortable that someone at the network layer knows that I'm watching a movie now, but I'm less comfortable that they know that I'm posting a particular transaction to my broker, let's say, right? So there's like different levels of privacy that can be afforded depending on what the user does. So I think that's an important point, and we have to. So what I'm saying is that we have to rethink the infrastructure, but we also have to differentiate according to use case, because it's not possible to have one solution, one privacy enhancing solution fit for everything. I think that's one important point. And now the second one I want to make and finish with this is that one important other element that I think it's worth putting more bandwidth on from a technical perspective is something that relates to right of access and in GDPR. And I would take like this right of access to its ultimate somehow transparency level, saying, can we give to the user, let's say forget privacy entirely, but can we give to the user an absolute full detailed account of what's going on with their data? So can we give that information? Because once we give that information to the user, because most users have no clue how their data are being used. Yes, they click agree on these agreements and, but in most cases, they have no understanding where their data are being used. So, but if you look at right of access, and, I'm happy to hear Nikolai's interpretation of this, but my interpretation of it at the ultimate level would be like that the system should give a good understanding to the end user how their data are being used. And it would be nice to be able to offer that, because once the users do understand how their data are being used and how they're monetized in many cases, then maybe their demand for privacy is gonna be different. Because I think like still today, many users do not understand how their data are being used and monetized by the systems that they use. So that's my comment.
Absolutely.
Back to you, Claire.
Yeah. Excellent comment. And especially good that now we are moving to the concluding remarks of this conversation. It is absolutely true that different levels of privacy need to be afforded, potentially automatically, just different levels of security. Your concern about the connected jewelry and its security is completely different than the concern about, a nuclear power station and the security of the transactions associated with it. That goes without saying. there were numerous projects focusing on creating a new internet with new information infrastructure. Adrian Perig had a few of those, for instance, that I think you all remember. But the difficulty in implementing any of those excellent blueprints is that the business model of a lot of the internet is based on data sharing, and it's very difficult to overcome that while preserving the essentially free services. So with this in mind, and the proliferation of AI that is, in terms of LLMs at least, the ultimate data sharing application, what is your view of the future of privacy in this environment? And are you neutral? Are you positive? Are you negative? This time we'll go in reverse alphabetic order. Bruce, what do you think the future is?
I think the future is, to the point that Angelus made and everything, is going to rely upon how people are informed to see, what really, is being done with their data. Because some people look at it from a perspective and get paranoid and think it's being used for, all sorts of nefarious purposes. It's probably not. But on the other side of the coin, they could be shocked to see how some of their data is shared. And so I think, smarter regulations moving forward that actually try to do meaningful, make meaningful differences in terms of how things are shared. Regulations that I think, to the point that go through and inform users in terms of what it actually is happening as opposed to what could happen. And also, the development of, smarter technologies that enable, privacy to be done on a more seamless, fashion that doesn't, impact performance, but also doesn't impact the user experience as well. I mean, that's, how do I put it? I think that's a hope, as opposed to, it might be an unachievable goal, but it's one that I think is where things should be headed.
Are you positive, negative, or neutral in terms of the privacy picture, let's say 5 years from now?
I'm positive. Let me just put it that way. I can't see. I mean, let me just call it. I'll go through and say I'm positive.
Positive. Thank you, Nikolai. What do you think?
I'm going to segue out of a lot of things that Bruce said. I do think, just like Angelus said, it's the transparency that's the core in here. Again, trust. And I think LLMs and emergence of other algorithmic solutions hasn't really brought, in my opinion, a lot of new things into the field as far as we're looking at privacy and use and collection of personal data, but rather sped up already existing mechanisms and sort of business models, if you will. So in effect, it's more about fostering and hoping that we can foster a better trust-based environment that will need work from all the stakeholders involved. And as long as there is enough transparency, and as long as there's enough understanding of what certain technologies can bring in, both positive and negative, I do think that we could have a more beneficial kind of use of LLMs and other AI-driven technologies. So also anticipating your answer, I think I'm neutral, but with a really big chance of sunshine from that neutral.
Okay, thank you. Well, if I were to be asked about this, I probably would also say that I am neutral. Angelos, what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm glad that Bruce brought up the point of the other type of user who is getting too paranoid with what's going on with their data, because I think it really pairs very well with what I was saying earlier, and like going back to also what Nikolai was just saying. I think I'm really glad we also turned this conversation now to something about transparency, because I think it's kind of wrong just to focus on saying like, oh, we need privacy. What we really need is having the ability to have privacy enhancing capabilities to the degree that the user wishes and wants based on what the user wants to do. And transparency for that is key. So I think that conversation around privacy has to be paired with a conversation about how do we improve transparency of IT systems. And I think I'm very positive about that aspect. There's a lot of technologies, mentioning, for example, blockchain technologies, distributed ledgers, that are capable of bringing more transparency to the mix. And I think actually this can have a very positive effect on privacy, not privacy in some absolute type of, let's say, academic level, but a real pragmatic privacy, a type of privacy that users actually want. Because that's also something that the IT systems that we build should help the users understand, right? What is the privacy that they actually want? So I'm actually positive about this, that we should be able to offer it.
Yeah, outstanding comment. And I think now we are really, technologically at least, as close to user-controlled privacy as we have ever been. And that is, without any doubt, a positive. Ro, what do you think?
Well, I look on the positive side. That's my outlook. In many ways today, there is all the technologies and regulators debate that has to be done, and privacy, enhancing technologies, are vertically applied in very specific use case. With the adoption of technologies like distributed ledgers that kind of give the user more control on its own information, and other technologies associated with it, I can see that at some point we will be able to render a page out of blobs of encrypted data, okay, and still be able to claim ownership and share data in a safe way. So I think the technology is getting there. I don't know if the horizon is 5 years or more from now, because you gave a timeline, but I'm positive.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ro. And I'm glad that we conclude this panel on predominantly a positive note. Thank you very much for sharing your views. Ro, Nikolai, Bruce, Angelos, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on the subject. I hope we will be able to reconvene again in a few months to focus on artificial intelligence. This is a very interesting topic with regard to technical privacy and how it will itself in various environments. But for now, I would like to thank you again and pass on to our organizer, David Goodman of the Trust of Digital Life Association. David?
Thank you, Claire, and thank you for moderating this great session. It would be great to have a replay in a few months' time with more of an AI focus. And thank you to the speakers for joining from such exotic locations in so many different time zones. That's really great. The recording of the session will be available probably at the beginning of next week, together with a short report. And the next webinar is going to be in 2 weeks' time on the 8th of May. Alarming that it's already May. At the same time, 1600 Central European Time. And the subject is the evolving role of the CISO, moderated by Steve Purser. So with many thanks again, I wish you all a good morning, good afternoon, good evening.